Okay, so looks like we've got a bunch of topics here. So let's just stop the time here. So we've got quite a few. So now we'll go back to voting. So if you haven't voted yet, if you have already, I think you can remove your votes if you need to. The way you vote on the topics, and I'm just going to move this one back. How do I move it back? Oh, it's because I'm in the wrong thing. Okay, so this is what it should look like for everybody now. So the little vote button under each card. So take a minute to kind of read through what's there, and any topic you're interested in, you can vote on. I think everyone's got 3 votes, and it kind of caps it there. And once you've got your votes in, I'm going to push a button. It's going to reorganize everything in order, and we'll start talking. So another, let's call it 90 seconds to read through what's there and vote. If anyone's having trouble with the voting thing, just let me know.
Is this tool free, Matt?
There's a free trial, which is for 30 days, and I think after that it's like $10 a month.
Okay.
It's pretty good. Like, for this kind of exercise, it's really well tuned. It's purpose built. So in the past, I've tried to do this with tools like Trello and other things, and they kind of work. But this one really, it's built for a specific thing. It's pretty good.
I used like Fun Retro last time for it's pretty good too.
Nice. Okay, so that's it. We're going to close off the voting. And so what I'm going to do now, sort and move. Is that what I want to do? There we go. So the topics that don't have any votes, just stay off in the backlog. We can come back to those at the end if we have time, but looking at how much time we have left, probably won't. So a lot of items with 2 votes, one with 1. So we're going to start with the first one. So the way this works is I'm going to drag this over to discussing. I'm going to set 7 minutes, so we're going to have 7 minutes to talk about it. And at the beginning, Karen, if you don't mind, just kind of describe a little bit. This is, like a brief 20-second pitch about what the topic is, so everyone kind of has some more context. And then we'll talk about it. And when the timer runs out, we'll decide whether or not to continue. So you can go ahead, Karen.
Okay, this is essentially the team that I was working with believes they're strong at Scrum, but they're not. But there is a functional manager on the team who wants to attend all the meetings. So in the daily Scrum, she wants to talk about her management tasks. In the day-to-day work where we're trying to do our sprint planning or any of those types of events, she wants to also, inject and say things like, well, we shouldn't do this because we need to get this done, or we need to do this instead. So she's not actually, she thinks she's helpful, but she's really coming at it from a functional management perspective as opposed to part of the team. So I've tried you don't need to be at the daily Scrum. You're okay not to attend these events, but she still is there. That's kind of it. That's
interesting.
Part of my problem. Super nice lady though.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, right? Usually all this stuff is people are well-intentioned. It's just sometimes just a matter of misunderstanding. Has anyone else had something similar to that in their work worlds or previous worlds?
Yes. I don't know, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Not so much about functional managers per se, but actually senior managers who seem to think that they know what should happen and what shouldn't happen, and trying to manage what their expectation is versus keeping within the framework. It gets challenging. And again, I mean, it's well-intentioned. Sometimes those are the ones that are really all fired up, but they just don't seem to want to spend the time to understand what Scrum is.
So what's been your kind of approach to that? What's worked, or what have you tried and didn't work?
So what I say in my head and what comes out of my mouth is different. It's really just been, I've been dealing with this for the past 2 years, where it continues every month. I'm having to say the same thing, but in different ways. And it's really just about, you know, the way that Scrum works is this is how we do it. And, you know, the idea behind our daily is that the team is talking about how they're progressing towards the goal, and how are they progressing to get the work done from, you know, from day to day, and are there any challenges, and sometimes pointing out that, you know, their well-intentioned ideas are just adding noise. Finding a diplomatic way to say that sometimes is challenging.
Yeah.
But it's been that's sort of been an ongoing thing for me ever since we started you know, adopting Agile at a very, very snail pace. And, you know, just dealing with those people that just don't quite get it.
Yeah.
So education.
Yeah, exactly.
I also feel I'm not sure about the other events, but they shouldn't be attending retrospectives at least, because otherwise team will not feel comfortable like sharing what they want to share or how they feel about the whole thing. So I think the other events they can attend. I'm not like totally 100% sure, but definitely not retrospective.
That was going to be my question, Karen, that you're in your situation, are they coming to the retrospectives?
They're coming to everything. Yep, including the retrospectives.
So what's kind of worked for me in those kinds of scenarios is if you can convince them to not come to one retrospective. And sometimes I've had to be kind of sneaky about this, where I've actually had to book, or I asked the team to book the retrospective at a time where I know the manager is busy with other stuff. But that's kind of a last resort. The first one is like, hey, can you, just humor you for a sec? I just want to do a retrospective with, just the team. Oh, we have someone in the waiting room here. With just the team. And, let's just kind of see how it goes. And in that retrospective, without fail, the topic of, hey, why is so-and-so manager at all of our meetings tends to come up. And now you can have a conversation as a team to talk about, how that's impacting the team, whether it's helping or hurting and all that sort of thing. And that gives you a little bit of talking points to bring back to the manager, and not in a, you're not going to say, hey, so-and-so said they really don't want you to be in the meeting. It's a little bit more, hey, the team kind of noticed this, and they've mentioned this is how it's impacting their ability to focus during the meetings. And, if you want some help to understand what the goal of these different ceremonies are, I can help you with that. But yeah, if it's coming just from you from like an academic kind of sense, where you're just saying, hey, Scrum says that you're not supposed to be here, you're going to get a ton of resistance, right? And then the follow-up generally needs to be, what do you need from a management perspective, and how can we satisfy that in a way that doesn't interrupt the team and their ability to kind of do their work. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Does anyone else have anything they want to add to that topic?
Yeah, I mean, like with the virtual now, like so many online tools, there's option for being anonymous. So if like, team members are not feeling comfortable sharing what they feel about this functional manager, they have an option to stay anonymous and, in the retrospective.
Yeah. Yeah, this is one of those, like, there's a big dose of it depends, right? It depends on what the relationship is like between the team and the functional manager. And if that relationship is already in a tenuous place, then that's going to kind of change the way that you want to kind of approach them.
In this case, the functional manager is very well liked and is actually kind of fits in as one of the team. She was one of the developers and was promoted, so she still plays in the space of, you know, one of the gang, one of the friends.
Yeah, totally.
So
So
they all, like, nobody seems to be.
okay, so we came to the end of our first topic. So the way that this works now, if you go back to your Lean Coffee screen, you have these vote buttons. So you can vote whether to extend or end. And if you want to extend, we'll talk about it for another couple minutes. If you want to move on, you can just click on the end button. I think I actually have to click on one to be able to see the votes. A few more seconds in case anyone wants to vote or switch the vote. Okay, so it looks like we're good to end that one. So we're going to move that one over. And we're going to start the next one. So Snehal, you want to kind of talk through this one a little bit?
Yeah, so I have like two multiple teams, which are each members, at least like 9 members each. And they worked on a project like which lasted for three months. So I wanted to kind of hold a retrospective, but I was planning to do in the office, but now being virtual, I feel it's going to add like a lot of noise, and the intent of the retrospective might not be achieved, like the goal or any action items. It's just going to be like noise and like a lot of talk, especially the loudest voice.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm thinking of other ways. How can I do this better? And should I gather data before? Should I send out a survey before? But I'm not sure. How do I approach this in a better way?
Yeah, so I want to open this up for discussion, but just quickly off the top of my head, there was a webinar that happened last week that touched on this exact topic. I'm going to take a note to kind of send that link over.
Okay.
Because it had some really good ideas specifically around how to do these things virtually.
Awesome. Okay.
So I'll make sure I send that out after. But so has anyone else on the call been doing virtual retrospectives since all this craziness has happened? And if so, what's worked for you? What hasn't worked for you?
I just finished the retrospective. Mine are always funky, but not to what I've done, but maybe an idea to think about is if you have somebody on your team that is the loudest, sometimes on another team that I worked on, what I found is asking them for help seemed to kind of occupy them and limit the noise that they added. So in the instance of doing your virtual, maybe because it's a larger group, maybe ask them to help you manage the room, per se, the virtual room, by if somebody is help to like watch the screen in case, and have them use the raise the hand piece if they have questions, but you have them all on mute. That might help. And if you have the person that is the loudest voice, and I've had those, I found that it seems to work better when I give them a little bit more responsibility, because then they're more distracted with the responsibility versus feeling like they have to jump over everything.
Right.
That's awesome. Yeah, like give them a job.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because I know that Matt and I worked together for a bit with my company, and we had a few people who were quite loud.
Yep.
And one of the things that we found is one person just wanted to do everything, and so when we gave them a job other than just being part of the team, it seemed to appease them and help them feel like they were contributing members versus needing to speak all the time.
I think it's a great idea, like and for me to have another hand to or like manage this. Do you think like do you guys have any opinions, thoughts on should I just like hold a retrospective, or should I just send a survey before to gather some data before I walk into the virtual retro?
So I can tell you sorry, go ahead, Russ.
I was going to say, I think both could work. I have found that and I've worked with some challenging teams, So I have found that when you're working with that, sometimes having some data, because then it makes you feel like you have some more control in regards to the agenda and helping drive the conversation, so that when it does start to segue out, because it is their retrospective, right? It's about them, how they work together. So you don't want to go in feeling like you're in control and you're driving the dialogue, but at least when you have some kind of guideline, just like the framework is a guideline, having some information ahead of time might help steer the conversation to keep it on point about how did we work as a team.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. That so that webinar I was talking about, one of the people on the panel was actually Esther Derby. She's the one that wrote that book, Agile Retrospectives. And her take on that stuff was like, yep, for if you have any kind of quantifiable stuff that you need to gather, definitely do that before the session, so that you're not, wasting time fiddling with the tools and collecting the data that way. But the other thing she had to say was, when you're doing these things remotely, having the structure of the meeting in place and really sticking to the structure and letting people know where we are in the flow of the retrospective becomes really important, right? So, at the beginning, opening up with, doing a check-in exercise and letting them know, hey, we're doing a check-in exercise right now. This isn't to gather data yet. We're just trying to get everyone, aligned to the purpose and all that kind of stuff. And actually going through like the 5 stages that a typical retrospective needs to go through. When you're doing this stuff virtually, it becomes like super important, because it's really easy for people to get lost in, what are we actually doing right now?
Yeah, and people get carried away with start discussing the topic before we actually people start voting on it. Yeah. And then I feel extremely difficult, in difficult position to stop people, okay, we are not discussing this right now, we're just
exactly
putting up there.
Exactly. And for some reason, when it's virtual, it's just a lot easier for people to kind of follow that. I think part of it is because you can't really you can't read the room as well as a facilitator. And I think this kind of dovetails into that other point that Rose was talking about having someone helping out with some of that stuff, whether it's because they're the loudest person in the room or not, becomes really helpful as a facilitator. I found to have someone kind of managing some of that stuff, so that you can focus on managing the conversation itself.
Okay. So I guess the action item is Matt to send out the link for the webinar.
Yep. I've got a note for that. I think it was about an hour long. I missed 15 minutes of it because my network dropped out, but what I was able to see looked really, really good, really helpful.
Okay, awesome. Thanks, Matt.
No problem.
I guess
14 seconds if you've got anything quick.
If you have any thoughts on the questions in the survey, because I want to keep them open-ended, so whether just start, stop, continue, or any thoughts would be great.
Okay. I'm going to vote to extend, because I want to still talk about this one a little bit, but you all vote the way that you want to vote.
Awesome.
I did the thing that you're not supposed to do as a facilitator. I'm sorry. Okay, I'm going to put 2 more minutes on. So yeah, the questions and the survey kind of stuff and the open-ended thing, not totally tied to that, but if you're doing stuff like trying to gather, if you're in the gather data phase of the retrospective and it's not quantifiable stuff, if you're actually looking for people to use words and describe things, there's a couple of techniques that you can do that kind of, because usually when you do a retrospective in person, people are writing on sticky notes, they have a bit of quiet time to write their thoughts down and not be broadcasting at the same time.
Right.
So one thing you can do if you're using Zoom or any of the tools is have people write what they're thinking at the same time in the chat window or whatever tool it is that you're using, but have them hold off on actually pressing the enter button. So have them type everything up. Nobody can see what anyone else has written yet. And then at the end you say, okay, 3, 2, 1, everybody press enter. And so that kind of gives them that time to think and write things down without actually talking about it. And then you kind of roll back and say, okay, so now you get them to read through what they wrote, so they get to do kind of both sides of it.
Right.
So that's a pretty good technique to kind of get that more qualitative information in a way that's still, not anonymous, but at least you're giving people space to do things.
Right.
Anything else anyone would want to share on that topic? Okay, I think we can move it over before the time expires.
Sure.
Let's see what happens. Hey, it worked.
Cool.
All right, so next topic. Let's move that over. Oops. Put 7 minutes on the clock again. So this one is from Karen again. So Karen, would you like to kind of talk about this one a little bit?
Yeah, okay, so in the team actually is partly focused on operational day-to-day work, and half the team is focused on developing the new functionality. And we've been struggling with, how do we actually account in the sprint for work that is research or investigation or operational, in addition to the development side for new functionality and features. So there's been a debate, do we track the operational stuff separately? Do we put it all in the sprint and estimate it like we do all the other work? And so it's really just how do you actually account for people's time? Because there is people that do both, where they're doing development and they're doing operational, but how do we actually know, what the team's velocity is, with half of it being DevOps, where it's not necessarily new features that we need to release? That's kind of the gist of it.
Yeah, can you kind of expand a bit on what operations type work means in your context? Because it could be a little bit different for different people.
So if there is any production issues that get logged, and in this case they get logged in ServiceNow, they come through the help desk and then they come into the team as, this is an issue that's in production and we need to resolve it. Sometimes that investigation can take hours, sometimes it can take weeks, depending on what it is. So people are working on that, but they also have to work on new features. So it's just, how do we build up our sprint in our sprint planning when we have both sustainment or operational, keep the lights on stuff in addition to the new work? And where do we track that, especially when some of the DevOps work is outside of our actual team, but there's still people we need to use in the team. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It does. And yeah, I mean, I've come across teams with that kind of setup quite a bit. What about anyone else on the call? Have you had teams that were kind of set up in that way? How did you handle it?
A team wasn't set up that way. Like before Scrum Master, I was a QA in one of the team, and our team used to handle a lot of production issues. So what our Scrum Master and we came together, came up with the idea as set up some points in the sprint, especially for the production issues, around like 5 or 8, and include that in the sprint planning. So that's one of the technique we did. And also it's also product owners kind of responsibility to how much all the production issues need to be fixed right away or not, or they can be deferred in the next sprint. So we kind of work with the product owner as well as setting up some story points just for the production issues in the planning session itself.
When you were doing that, how did you kind of come up with the ratio of how many call it points, but capacity or whatever, how much do we set aside for those kinds of things?
So we looked at the data and go back few sprints and how much time on average we spend. So we came up with the 8 point story, 8 points, story points worth of time. So on average, how much?
Yeah. So that's great, right? Like using data to kind of inform our forward plans. That's kind of what it's all about. There's a few things in there, and I don't want to get too far off the track. But the fact that the team seems to be responsible for some of the production elements of what they're developing is actually a very good thing, or at least it can be a very good thing, because the follow-up needs to be usually not just how do we plan for and how do we track and how do we manage it, but how do we reduce the amount of time we spend fighting those production fires. And when the team is responsible for dealing with production, usually there's a built-in motivation to improve quality. And usually that's the direction that, once we kind of get our arms around the management of it and deal with what's happening now, the next question needs to be, how do we just like reduce the amount of time we need to spend on these kinds of things? And that usually leads to a discussion around technical practices and automated testing and, deployment pipelines and all of that kind of good stuff. But usually that's the second part, right? The first part is managing with what the current situation is.
What about if it's not a production issue? What about if it's just plain doing research and investigation before they can actually move forward with a new functionality?
Yeah, so for those that's definitely a little bit different than operations type work. One of the common ways of handling that is just by putting spikes in the backlog, right?
Right. Okay.
We use spikes as a product backlog item, and there's probably a few different ways to approach it. The two most common ways that I see to approach that is you estimate it just like however you're estimating any of the other work that you're doing, and it just becomes part of the work. The other way is instead of estimating, we time box. So we say, we have this feature coming up later on in the backlog. We need to do a little bit of research to figure out how to approach it. So we're going to spend, or one or two people or the entire team or whatever it needs to be is going to spend half a day in this sprint researching that. And all that means is we're going to forecast a smaller amount of other work that we're going to be able to get done in the sprint.
That's helpful.
It's kind of two sides of the same coin, but it's for some teams it's a little bit easier to do it one way or the other. The next level to that is, how do we bake that kind of work, that research and design, into the actual product backlog item of the delivery of that feature itself? That one is a little bit harder to get to because sometimes the lead time is a lot longer when we're talking about research and all that sort of thing. But ideally, it's part of the work, right? We have this product backlog item, this feature, this whatever it is that we need to develop and deliver. Part of the work is doing the research around that. It gets a little bit uncomfortable because sometimes it ends up spanning sprints and all that sort of thing, but that's kind of the next place to go. So time's up for that one. So let's get our votes in. I'm not going to lead the witness, so I'm not going to put a vote in. I'll give you all a minute to click whichever one you want to click. I don't know if you can hear my kid yelling in the background, but I can hear him through my microphone right now. It's kind of funny.
No, can't hear it.
Okay. We'll see if he makes an appearance at some point. Okay, so we all voted to end, it looked like. So let's end that one. Move that one over. We've got 15 minutes, so we should be able to get one, maybe both of these we can get in. So let's start with this one. So this one is from Rose. I'm going to put 7 minutes on the timer. And Rose, can you talk us through this one a little bit?
So we have it structured that we have a product owner, and then we have an executive sponsor, if you will, somebody that oversees the overall initiative, strategic initiative for that area. So I work with a digital marketing team, and most of it's internet development. I have a manager of that team, as well as managers of other teams, and the executive sponsor of our digital marketing team saying, well, let's just add more bodies and then we can get more work done. Mm-hmm. And I'm trying to explain to them that the intent is that we absolutely want to add more people if that makes sense, but we want to be conscious of not just the personality, but the skill set, because the intent is that the team should have all the skill set that they need in order to get the work done. So we spent time, the product owner and I spent time identifying what are some of the gaps from a skill set that we see that we think would add value to the team based on what, the team has said, we can do this, or, we're not as familiar with this kind of development, et cetera. So I keep going back, and I've been doing this for a year. I keep going back saying, I'm happy to add additional bodies and have more people participate in the Scrum team. We just want to make sure that we have the right skill set. And so I get, yes, absolutely, you're right. And, go do what you need to do and let us know. And then a few months later, I'm having the same conversation. And I'm just not sure if there's another way for me to say without getting a sledgehammer saying, look, here's what we need. Now, the other day I went back and I clearly identified, here's the kind of skill set that we think would add value to the team. Yes, that makes sense, but wouldn't it make, shouldn't we just add more bodies and get more work done? And it's like, but that doesn't work. Adding more people doesn't mean we're going to get more work done. So I think I'm at a point where I'm getting a little bit stumped with my wordsmithing, in the sense of trying to figure out, how do I tell these people that adding a body just for the sake of adding a body doesn't always work.
Yeah. Has anyone had experience with that? Adding people to a team that's already maybe working pretty well?
And just to add, this is a very small team. It's like it's a 4-member team, excluding myself as a Scrum Master and the product owner. But they're really, really good. Like, they get a lot of work done, and despite the fact that they have other things that get thrown at them, and so they're a really well functioning team, and they gel really well. And that was also my point, is that I want to make sure that, and Matt has experiences with me, I don't want to just add a body and have it add noise.
Yeah. So Rose, I guess there's kind of 2 sides to that question, and maybe you can decide which one you want to talk more about. There's the question of, like, should we, right? Like, is it good? Is it just generally a good idea to add a person to a team? The other side of it is, if we agree that we are going to add a person to the team, how do we do that in a successful way? I'm not sure which one of those you'd want to focus more on.
The second one, if we add another person, how do we do that successfully?
Cool. Anyone?
Because I fear that my concern is that if I let them choose who they add, it's just going to create a whole lot of friction on the team.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm a little confused. Are you guys moving team members from one team to another, or are you hiring new and adding new? Because I think onboarding, we can talk about onboarding a little bit.
So my company is not fully agile. We're still in the very, very early stages. And when I mentioned earlier snail pace, I really meant snail. We started with a pilot team that I spearheaded. They moved into what they're calling a Scrum team, but they're really just a bunch of developers working together with a manager telling them what to do. I now work on a Scrum team that is as Scrum as I can get it at the moment. That management is wanting to add more people to the Scrum team so that they can do more work. And adding people from internally who are currently doing just standard operational stuff.
Is there any data to support the need for more developers? Because I know from our side, we had a problem where we'd get into sprint planning and we'd find that there was no development work because some developers had no life and were working day and night. And so all of a sudden it was a sprint of QA. And so it would look like that we need less developers and more QA. So I'm just wondering why they think that adding more developers would create better or more velocity.
Good question. I think part of the challenge is that environmental system-wise, we have one system for our digital marketing platform. So from a technical standpoint, we run into issues. There is no data, to your point, there isn't anything that says that we need more bodies. I think it's just them feeling like if we add, they have a long list of things that they want to get done. And they want to add production support, business as usual, enhancements, projects. They want the team to do everything. And so they think that if we add another body, will that allow you to continue to just spit out more work?
So it sounds like it's not just even adding more bodies, it's adding like different things for the team to focus on.
Yeah, that's a whole other topic. I tried to limit it.
I wonder if there's any any appetite to convince the management layer to get through, you know, probably 3 or 4 sprints, assuming they're 2 weeks each, just to collect data of how much work the current team can actually get done, because you need some kind of metrics to be able to justify, no, we don't need, or yes, we do need more of this type of resource or this type of resource. But I understand the challenge, because it's certainly hard when the executive layer don't seem to, they don't understand Scrum enough to be supportive, because they should be supporting you.
Absolutely. And one of my challenges is that the senior management was scheduled to do product owner training and canceled 3 times. So says he's supportive of it, but isn't willing to go and spend the time, right?
Right.
What we did do to that point though, Karen, is we did, the product owner and I, we're both on the same page. We looked through her backlog. We looked through all of the items that are coming. We looked at all of the projects that are planned for her team that are from a business planning standpoint. We looked at the skill set that's within our team with the 2 developers. And what, you know, and we've asked the team, it's like, okay, so based on, you know, some of the projects that we talked about that could be coming our way, based on what you know you can do you feel like we need another body? Do you feel like we're missing anything? And they're like, no, we think we can manage. Like, okay, great. So that lasted for 3 months. And then we got asked again to add, you know, should we not be adding more people? So we spent some time the other day and looked at what's coming, what's in flight, and identified, you know, okay, what kind of skill set would we, if we were to add another body, what would that skill set look like? What's missing here? And we thought that maybe having a more senior person a more senior developer that is more familiar with back-end versus front-end development, maybe that would add, you know, kind of quiet some of the noise and let them understand that if we were to fill a gap, this is the gap that we would want to fill. So that was the latest proposal on the table. Trying again to find some data to support whether we need it or not. The truth is that we don't. The truth is that at this point, this team is really well for having 2 developers, a QA and a BA skill set on this team. They do a really good job getting stuff done. Like they get a lot of work done, more than my original pilot Scrum team did.
Yeah,
so there is nothing supporting that they need it. It's
yeah.
just somehow senior management thinks they do.
There's also just the thing of like the existing harmony that's existing within the team, right? Anytime you add an element to it, it kind of throws things off, especially depending on who that person is. Could really slow things down. I mean, I kind of wonder if there's like a happy medium where you can kind of say uncle and tap and say fine, we'll take a person, but can we do it in a way that it's like it's a trial? So let's do it for a couple of sprints or a few sprints and just see how things happen. And if it seems like things are slowing down, you know, maybe the person goes back to their old team or whatever. There's issues with that as well. But that may be an option to kind of sort of mitigate, at least if it does become an issue.
Yeah, I think that my concern is also that by, if we're adding another body, should we not be looking at adding a skill set that's needed versus adding the same skill set? Like if I add another front-end developer, I already have 2 front-end developers who are learning back-end development. Do I need a 3rd front-end developer to sit and spin? Well, because there's not enough work for just front-end development.
Yep.
So that's been my challenge that continues to go on for the past year with this team. I've managed to quiet the noise, but I think, Karen, to what you were saying about data, I think that I did send a proposal out to what potentially we could add to the team, but I think that I will take that away and try and see the work that is coming, how much of it is what kind of skill set are we missing in that work that we're doing for the next few sprints, and see what happens.
It doesn't sound like a team problem. It sounds like a leadership problem.
Oh yeah, it's not. definitely not a team problem.
That's often the case. That's often the case. Cool. Okay, so we've got 5 minutes. So I'm actually going to end this one, so we can maybe spend 5 minutes, a bit of a shorter discussion on the last one. I'm happy to stick around afterwards for a little bit as well if anyone wants to talk about things, but I want to at least get this one going. So let's put 5 minutes on.
All right.
And Karen, I'll let you take it away.
So this kind of goes back to some of what Rose is dealing with as well. So the product owner is, no, we can't go to 3-week sprints because we always work in 2 weeks. And when I came and look at what they're doing, they're actually not working in 2-week sprints, but they think they are. So I said, okay, fine. So we did our definition of done, and they said, okay, well, when QA has at least tested it in a QA environment, that's our definition of done. But the problem with that is you still need them to test it in a staging environment before it's actually truly an increment ready for production, even if you go to production later down the road. So then you end up having the testing in the staging environment of sprint, say 8, going on in sprint 9, and QA never catches up because we've got this developer over here that's working at home all the time because he's a single guy with no life, so he works all the time. And so now you have, I even said to the manager, you need to lock this guy's access out after hours because way down the track developing. And another problem with that is he's not actually working on the story cards. He's just doing work. So then when you actually try to clean up and say, is this actually development complete? He's like, it's close. No. So we've got kind of that going on, but we got the product owner saying, no, we need to continue to release every 2 weeks. But I'm not sure how to get through that. The other problem is we're using Jira, which is great, except that you can't usually have 2 sprints running actively at the same time, or haven't figured out how to successfully do that properly.
And nor would you really want to.
No,
right?
like you want your sprint to be done. And so anyways, that's what I'm trying to figure out, without trying to say we really need to extend to 3 weeks if QA needs more time.
So my and I hate to kind of just jump in and start talking, but there's not a whole lot of time, so I will. Usually when this kind of stuff comes up, the first inclination is to, okay, well, let's just make the sprints a little bit longer so there's time for QA to get their job done. And usually all that does is really paper over the underlying issue. And usually the underlying issue is, again, kind of what we were talking about earlier, is around technical practices and just quality in general, and how the way that we're actually building software. Forget about Scrum or any framework in particular, but just how are we actually coding and doing the testing and all that sort of thing. Because when you have a lot of manual testing that's required, it always snowballs like that. And so you're always going to feel like, well, if we just had a longer sprint, then QA could catch up, or maybe we just need to hire more QA people and hire less development people and that sort of thing. And the hard truth usually is we need to take a hard look at our definition of done. We have to take a hard look at how we're doing testing, because if the developers aren't doing testing, or the developers aren't writing good automated tests, it's always going to be this way, right? There's always going to be this lag and this sort of extended lead time to get something deployed. Because when you have a different group that's responsible for quality within the team, what ends up happening is it goes to QA, they test it, they find issues because that's their job, and there are issues. And now you're in this cycle of bug fixing and trying to get things done. And then the next sprint starts and they start developing new stuff while the people are still testing the stuff from the previous sprint. And it just kind of gets out of control. So, I mean, you could try extending, you could try 3 weeks and see if you get to a plateau, but usually, it may be okay for a little while, but eventually you're going to run into the same problem. And it's a tough one, because without changing the underlying technical practices, there isn't really a lot of sort of process or management that's going to be able to make up for that. I don't know if anyone else has had kind of similar experiences with that.
I've had the opposite, in that I've actually had a combo. I've had where where they want to line their sprint up with the release so that they have more time to work on stuff, even though they can get it done. They didn't want to do, when you're done, you release it. When it meets our definition of done and it's good to go, let's release it. So I've had that. I've also, the team themselves are like really happy to kind of to release as they go and so, but the management seems to want them to do longer, so we just sort of bypassed it. But I've had different experiences in regards to teams. I think to your point, Karen, I think your challenge is that the team thinks that they're working in 2-week sprints, but they're not clear on what they're not following what your definition of done is. And so maybe an idea is that with your retrospective, you kind of you revisit the definition of done. And so for every item that is ready to go, or you think is ready to go, you kind of address it and go, okay, so does this meet our definition of done? And maybe in the planning, I know in planning, what I've been starting to do is call out, okay, guys, so when you say, like when they start adding their story points, like someone will say it's 5 and someone will say it's 20. It's like, okay, well, guys, remember that this is all the work that has to be done to meet our definition of done. And can you get it done? And, does that mean that you can get it done in this time frame?
Yeah, I think the revisiting the definition of done is perhaps important because they are meeting their current definition of done, which is it's tested in the first environment. Yeah. But there's also some things that you can't test in one environment. It can only be done in a higher environment. So then you can never get that one actually tested because the sprint ends and you're not in that higher environment.
Right. So one of the things that we added as our definition of done and as a whole is that any item that the team takes in and works on, for it to be done, it has to pass through staging and pass that and the QA and sign off. Like we sign off on it, but we have to promote it. It has to be ready to be shipped, as in if we can ship it today, then we ship it today kind of thing. So we added that in versus just, passing QA. Like we add that it gets deployed to production.
Right. And that's what ideally it should be. I mean, some of our challenges is we can't get to production at that time, but at least if it's, got a bow on and it's ready to go to production, that doesn't typically need the team to do. It's someone else, different team. So if we could just get through the staging environment, that would be handy. But to get that, we would need another week, or we need to take in less work, or we need to change the technology.
Maybe it is about revisiting the definition of done.
Yeah.
And the definition of done applies to each item, not just as a whole, but to each item. Will this item be completely tested in staging and ready to be shipped at the end of our sprint? And then looking at the next one and going, okay, so in addition to this number 1, will number 2 meet the same criteria?
Right.
And it might be that they take in less work for the time being, but as they get better at doing it, their velocity ends up picking up again later.
The other thing I need to work on is trying to get everyone to be able to talk in the estimating and the sprint planning and all of that, because what typically happens is the developers over talk or talk for the QA, which is not fair.
Yep. There's an experience, and just to point out, we're over time, but I'm happy to stick around and kind of keep talking. There's an experiment that you can consider with this thing, because one of the things I find in that case is, because we have the QA people and development people, and there's like a handoff and all that sort of thing. One thing you can try to kind of break through that a little bit is, as an experiment within a sprint, try to promote the idea of swarming on just one item at a time. at the beginning of the sprint at least. And it may feel weird, and some people may feel like they're idle or they don't actually have anything to do. But if you give them like, you know, here's one thing, let's all focus, or at least some group of the team, let's all focus on just getting this one thing to done as quickly as we can. So for a second, let's forget about sprints and let's forget about Scrum, but let's get this one thing to done. It'll force people to start thinking about doing work that maybe they're not always doing. Right, so it kind of nudges developers to think a little bit more about testing. It nudges the testers to think a little bit more about development, or at least arranging for test cases to be ready while the development is happening, and that sort of thing. It's something that I've had some pretty good success with. It kind of helps convince people a little bit that you know, if we commit to less, we can actually do more.
Yeah, that's a good thing. That's a good point too.
Yeah.
I've also, Karen, just as a side note, I have a QA who is very, very quiet. I have a BA who's very vocal, and my developers are kind of in between, right? So what I've done is when they start speaking for each other, I then call out the person and say, so are you, you know, Aldo, do you agree that, you know, this makes sense, or is there anything you want to add? Like, I start to make them feel like they're being more engaged.
Right.
And then the other team members start to take the cue that, oh yeah, I guess we should let him speak for himself.
Yeah.
I don't know. I often feel like I'm the master manipulator of trying to get people to do stuff when, you know, it's not my job to get them to do stuff, but trying to convince them that it's their job. It's I don't know. I think that Scrum Master needs to be retitled, Matt.
Yeah, there's a bit of a subversive side to that role.
Yeah. Make them think it's their idea.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And sometimes that works.
Yeah.
Sometimes not. My partner used to work in travel, and you know, she said that this could very much affect, depending on where you are in travel, but it's definitely going to impact the cruise industry for sure. Unless they come up with some really nifty plans in regards to prevention. But yeah, just in general, travel is definitely not happening outside of Canada, if you're lucky. Within Canada, if we're lucky, within Canada, within a few months. But outside of Canada, I can't see that happening this year at all.
No, I don't either, and I'm listening in on the calls on a weekly basis of what's happening, and the numbers are really bad. So anyway, so I'm taking this opportunity to learn more and
Awesome.
and keep applying for different things that may come up. And on that note, Matt, are you doing any virtual courses like the PSMs 2 or any of those?
So right now, the only one that I've got set up is the PSM 1. It's the one that you both already took.
Right.
There are a bunch of trainers that are starting to do the PSM 2 virtually. It's been kind of like a really cool collective effort to see all the trainers come together and figure out how to do this stuff virtually.
Yeah. Well, it's what's good about that is you don't have to travel to go to a course, so the costs of it become just the cost of the course.
Yeah,
it's nice. I have looked the stuff. Obviously, I don't want to be in a time zone that's middle of my night.
Yeah,
and I don't want to. All the stuff that's in Canada right now seems to be in French, which I don't speak. So.
Yeah. I know that trainer. He does train in English as well. So I would kind of keep an eye on it, because I'm sure there'll be one in English at some point.
There was a PSM 2 in last week that I kept trying to figure out if I can make, but I couldn't because of in the middle of a nightmare project. Surprise! Trying to, because Karen, not only am I a Scrum Master, but I'm also a project manager, so I have dual roles within the company.
Right.
The project manager role seems to be the one that people understand, and so they don't get that the Scrum Master work takes quite a bit of time. So anyway, I have a project that is in the midst of, you know, the end of its life, if you will, in the sense of going into production. So I couldn't manage taking 2 days away or 3 days away just to do, even though I wanted to, man, did I want. So I'm gonna watch for his for the next round and just make it happen.
Yeah, and we're starting to play with kind of stretching them out a little bit too, because like when they're in person, obviously you do 2 days back to back, but that's not so great when you're just sitting at a screen all day.
They
So a
seem
lot
to
of
be
trainers are doing
3
it like,
days now.
yeah, three
But
days and
part
a
days.
few hours each day. Yeah.
Yeah. Is the PSM2 actually something that's worth to take, or is it just something you could probably just do on your own?
It's so you have to remember too with Scrum.org, the assessments and the certifications are like they're decoupled from the classes, right?
Right.
And so the classes, especially with PSM2, I would say it doesn't like totally align with the assessment. It's really more about like purely like leveling up your skill as a facilitator, as a Scrum Master. So it's a lot more exercise based. Like we assume that people are coming in with a pretty good understanding of what the framework is already. So it's not so much about the framework. It's really more about what are the different stances you need to take as a Scrum Master, switching between coaching and mentoring and teaching, and how do you actually do some of those things. So it's a very different course.
If you spend more time doing some of the material that's under there, that it would be worthwhile to do that and just do the assessment versus trying to do a virtual workshop for PSM2.
Yeah, I mean, if it's just the assessment that you're interested in, is just a certification, yeah, you could probably, given that you've got some experience already and you can kind of read up, you probably have a decent chance of passing the assessment without taking the class. The assessment has been around since before there even was a PSM2 class. So just to give you an idea, it's not required. And if you're really looking to like learn and actually like improve and all that sort of thing, it's a great class.
Cool. Okay.
Yeah.
Good info.
Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah, we've lost a few people, but it was good to kind of see you all again. I'm gonna probably try to do this on a regular basis, so I'll send it another note. I don't know if weekly or bi-weekly.
Hey, Matt, can you do me a favor? Can you send the invite to my work invite as well?
Yeah.
That way, it's in my work calendar too, and then I don't have to double enter.
Perfect.
Cool. All right. Thanks for organizing this, Matt.
No problem. It's my pleasure. Thanks.
Take care, guys.
Bye.